So in this video, I want to talk a little bit about how first and foremost there can be so much division in society between men and women and how shadow work can actually heal this division between men and women in society. So we'll talk a little bit about where division comes from. We'll talk about how anytime we other a different group of people, this has so much to do with being in a space of learned helplessness within the relationship to ourselves, in regards to our own pain, our own wounding, but in particular our shadow. And we'll talk a lot about what shadow work is, what it really means, and how we can integrate traits to ultimately deeply and profoundly heal from these components of division we see on the outside, where we are dividing ourselves between, us and somebody else, but also that reflect and mirror to us division we have within ourselves in regards to our shadow and traits, and how overcoming this division through an exercise I'll share towards the end of this video can actually ultimately help you decrease your feelings of unworthiness and actually increase your feelings of self esteem and freedom on a daily basis. So, the first part I think that's a little bit tragic is that, when we have a group of people writing off millions of other people, it's actually at the root because of that individual's own wounds, right? Because obviously, I mean, consciously and objectively, it's very clear to see that, not every single person in this group of millions of people is going to be the way that you think they are because human beings are so unique. So let's say we, for example, have a woman writing off all men or a man writing off all women. Like, obviously, for whatever reasons, either one of them are writing this whole other group of people off, are not actually going to be representative of everybody's behavior within that group. And when we push somebody away, what we're actually doing, because we all have the capacity from a trait perspective to express different traits, when we make an entire group of people bad, whatever traits we have found bad about those group of people, we inevitably are going to actually express at times within the relationship to ourselves. So let's say, for example, that you have a man writing off all women and saying they're all takers, right? They're all gold diggers, right? So, like at the root, the trait would be maybe they are advantageous. So, of course, at one level, what we're going to see is that, first of all, that's just not true. Not all women are like that. And second of all, the moment that man expresses this taking quality or trait, because we all have the ability to give and to receive or to take, the moment that person has that, even though consciously they may not recognize it, when they're expressing it because they projected those terrible traits, these traits that they built really negative associations to, that those stored associations are there at a subconscious level. So the moment you build really negative emotional associations to traits and then you express those traits, it actually creates this subconscious sense of self-loathing and unworthiness at a deeper level. And it's not because of the trait being expressed and the trait being terribly bad, but because of your negative associations that are programmed around the trait. It has this sort of ripple out effect emotionally at the subconscious level of mind. And so when we look at vice versa, right, we could say that women say, okay, all men cheat or all men lie or, whatever it is that somebody is doing when they are othering another group of people. Well, the moment that that woman does that and then tells a white lie 2 weeks later, the same negative emotional associations will be there. And will essentially just be sitting there in an internalized manner, causing that person to feel this certain degree of self-loathing or, frustration in the relationship to themselves. Now, this is not necessarily a conscious process, right? These are things that happen at the shadow level within the subconscious mind. And we're going to talk about really how this works and how we can break this down. But I think it's really important to realize that when somebody ever is in a position where they're saying this entire group of people is bad, it's more about, number one, a shadow within themselves. A repressed trait that's coming up in a hidden form is what that means if you're not familiar with shadow work, and also learned helplessness in healing our own wounds more than anything else. And I think it's valid at the same time to recognize that men and women can both hurt each other, but it's a person to person dynamic, right? And, there's this old line in a book that I read one day and it always stuck out to me. I think the book was called The Shack. I forget who the author is, but it said most of our hurt comes from relationships, but so does most of our healing. And I think that when we're hurt, it's really easy to just, in the short term, just other a whole group of people, write off a whole group of people. They're all like this, they're all this way. But in reality, this form of doing that nihilistic thinking, all men are this way, all women are that way, all men are cheaters, all women are gold diggers, or these things that you're sort of seeing pop up amongst society nowadays. It's nihilistic thinking is always just a form of self-preservation or self-protection. In other words, it's easier to think in advance that this entire group of people is bad, so I can reject them before they reject me. But it just goes back to these old roots, right? It's like this why bother syndrome. And people do this in their careers. Oh, that working in a place like that is dumb. I never want to do that. Maybe that's because this person, is scared to try to be in that kind of situation or dynamic. And we see this a lot, of course, in dating. Oh, people with, these qualities, this group of people, they're all bad, they're all terrible. And really, if we could break down what was actually happening, the person's mind would actually be saying, if the subconscious could speak, would be saying, somebody in this group of people hurt me really badly one time. And because of this, I am in a space of learned helplessness in terms of how to heal that hurt. I'm still carrying that hurt. And in fact, these traits that I'm projecting onto this other group of people, I actually have the ability to express within myself, and it scares me and it terrifies me. And so I further try to reject this group of people because I'm rejecting these aspects of self. So this is not to say either that there aren't like really unhealthy people out there. Of course, there can be men that are cheaters or women that are gold diggers or whatever, societal stereotypes are sort of floating around. But it does no good to let on the individual level, our past continuously dictate our future if that past was negative or harmful. Instead, it does a lot of good to figure out what hurt us and to recognize that if we are ever in a position we are trying to demonize or write off another entire group of people, it is actually more about the present relationship to our hurt that we're still carrying than it is about the group of people themselves. So let's say, for example, that a woman gets cheated on at a young age. Okay. And for me, okay, so this happened to me at one point in a more serious relationship I was in. And I remember for myself at one point being like, oh, I'm just never going to be in a relationship again. Of course, that was me at like 19 and wounded and, and in that space. And I'm never going to be vulnerable again. But when we look at that, right, when we look at this mechanism of thinking, and this is very common for a lot of people, how does that mechanism of thinking serve me? Right. So I then have no real future relationships and connections because of something like maybe for decades, if I stuck to that. Right. And because of something that somebody else did to me because of their own woundedness, I'm going to then allow that to dictate my future relationship dynamics for decades. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. And so the approach I took as a person instead, obviously through lots of learning and reading and studying and growth, is that okay, no. If I feel this need to like disconnect from relationships to men romantically instead, that's actually telling me about how I'm feeling on the inside and that hurt is causing me to fear connection in the future. I'm instead going to heal the betrayal wounds. I'm going to heal the fear of being vulnerable. I'm going to allow myself to, be open and not let this old relationship dictate all of my future relationships. I'm going to learn to forgive and understand what was going on for that person, and I'm going to take the lessons away from it. And it doesn't mean you don't pay attention to red flags and like vet people better in the future, right? That's an important thing to do, but it means that you don't continuously allow your past to define your future for you and what you're looking to take away from it. So here's the really interesting part, and this is how shadow work comes into play here. So a lot of the time, the things that we are attracted to in others are repressed traits in ourselves that we're trying to deny or hide from ourselves, right? You hear Carl Jung talk about how the shadow is essentially these parts of the self that we try to deny or hide. But if they don't actually not get expressed, I think this is a really important recognition to make, is that just because we try to repress or deny or hide these traits within ourselves, usually they're still active because as human beings, we actually have the capacity to express all traits at various times. They are just active in hidden and more subtle forms. So for myself, I'll stick to the example of myself. When I was actually doing work on this, one of the things I looked for is like, okay, so the trait, right, that I was triggered by in this ex relationship was, okay, disloyal, right, or dishonest. And, or we could say, this person was a cheater, right? Even though I don't think that that even fairly defines that person. I just think that that's, the way we label it at the time. So where is this cheating, let's say, secretly mine, right? So you pick the trait and then you're like, where is this mine? And one of the first places you always want to look when you're trying to see if you actually have this trait in subtle forms is in the relationship to yourself. And what's so funny is at the time, at that age for myself, when I reflected on the cheating being mine in the relationship to self, I found that I was cheating my own standards, not just in relationships, but in multiple areas of life, like what I was looking for, what I wanted, what sort of standards I was even holding myself to at some points, what was okay for me and what was not okay. I was betraying that at times. I was going outside of my morals and values and cheating those things, kind of like settling for a life and a way of living that didn't actually feel like it was in alignment with my truth. And I was settling with what I was really looking for in many different aspects of life and relationships, but also in sometimes friendships at the time, or in the work and school sort of standards and growth that I wanted to have. And so I found that was like a big theme within the relationship to myself. So here I was not taking ownership of that trait and working to heal those dynamics, and not realizing that the thing that was triggering so much actually had to do with something that was alive within me. And then the second thing I looked for is, okay, where was I cheating the person that I'm in the relationship with or was in the relationship with? Because ultimately we ended the relationship right after. But I realized that I also cheated the relationship at times because I would constantly push this person away. I would constantly shut down and stonewall and not express my needs and essentially try to sabotage the relationship in a multitude of different ways. And I was cheating the relationship in that way because I was there, but I was constantly, not showing up for it in a way that would necessarily be healthy. So I have some exciting news, which is that we are doing $1,000 off of our lifetime membership sale to the Personal Development School, which means you get access to literally everything at PDS for your entire rest of your life. Essentially, that entails all of our different courses you have lifetime access to. I do 4 live webinars a week, every single week. You can access them ongoing, and you get access to all of our daily community events. So I'd love to see you on the other side, and you can access it by using the link in the description box below. And so when I was able to work through those shadow traits or qualities and recognize those aspects of myself coming out in these hidden forms and work to change those along with healing the different betrayal core wounds and the fears of being vulnerable in the future, what ultimately happened is that relationship was a beautiful lesson for me, was a beautiful catalyst for a lot more growth in my life because I allowed it to be there. And over time, as I started working with people as well, I found so much just understanding and care and appreciation for all people, right? And not having this belief that, oh, all men are this way, or all people are this way, all women are this way. Like, working through those things is ultimately extremely freeing for you as a person. And I've seen so many different people work through these sort of like toxic dating stories and PDS and things of that nature, but it's very valuable to do so. So, what we have to realize is that when we let one individual or a few individual experiences determine our entire future, it comes from learned helplessness around our own pain. And we have to be able to dig into that pain and realize that that is what that is mirroring to us. It's not mirroring to us how an entire group of people are, it's mirroring to us what is unhealed. And I believe that men and women have so much to offer each other, when we are actually empowered and in our own healing and really expressing that best version of ourselves. And I think it's important to realize as well that when you reject any entire group of people, based on the past, you exclude yourself from many people in society and in the world, and then you blame others sometimes for that loneliness and separation. And sort of in closing here, I do want to say if this is something that you relate to at all, where you've ever seen yourself other a group of people, because of pain, you can work through that pain, right? It has a lot to do with shadow work and core wound reprogramming. And so I will put out 2 courses, the emotional mastery and belief reprogramming course and the shadow work course down below for free for 14 days. If you want to check those out and sort of kickstart your healing journey there. And I'd love to see like, if you want to share your examples of how you've healed from this or what your relationship to some of these dynamics have been. I think as well, it's just really important to realize that division sells in the world. Division makes people easier to control. but division ultimately hurts. And so the more we can clean up any division between ourselves and others, the more we also clean up any division within ourselves from a shadow work perspective in regards to these traits that we are projecting onto others that may actually be within ourselves. And literally, shadow work, what we call the shadow work course at PDS, is overcome feelings of unworthiness by integrating your shadow. And the idea here is that these things that we think are so much about somebody else, we're not so triggered by those things if they're not personal to us already. We take them personally because they are personally alive within us at the time. And so by owning and integrating these traits, we get this capacity to feel much more whole within ourselves and heal those traits in the relationship to ourselves or express them in healthier ways. And we stop disconnecting and dividing, this sort of line in the sand between ourselves and others that ultimately hurts us the most. So I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for being here. You can check out those courses for free for 14 days. And if you're enjoying this channel, please like, share, and subscribe.